What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be showing you guys how to build this, an awesome $850 gaming PC build that is perfect for 1080p gaming now and into the future. I'll be picking the parts live, looking at alternative choices as we go, and explaining why I picked the parts that I did, then walking through how to build this system, how it performs, and how it looks now when it's all booted up. Let's do this. Corsair IQ Link is a smart component ecosystem that takes your connectivity and RGB to the next level without the cable clutter. You can synchronize and control up to 14 individual devices with just one IQ Link system hub, connecting your devices together with a single cable for power and data. No need to get frustrated with complicated cable management anymore with this easy system that links each device to the next. Buy your IQ Link setup at the first link in the description below. In order to get accurate and up-to-date pricing, I'm going to be using Newegg in this video. This isn't sponsored by Newegg, but I will leave links for all the parts in the description below. I think it's just a great way of seeing live and accurate pricing of all the parts we pick. And of course, it means that if you're prepared to shop around, you can potentially save even more money. Now, I'm going to start things off with the CPU and GPU combo. Budget CPUs, we've got a few options, either the Ryzen 5 7600 or an older Intel i5 chip from the 12th or 13th generation. First things first, I'm going to go ahead and find the Ryzen 7600 and see price-wise what that is going to come out to. Now, that is clocking in at $229, pretty good value, but in our $850 budget, $229 is a little bit on the tighter side. Let's see how we fare if we drop down to something like a 13400F. So an Intel i5 13400F saves us $20 or so, but in honesty, it's not really going to be make or break for this build. Let's see if we can go a step further and try the 12400F. This is Intel's 12th gen i5, straight away $149 US. If this was a $1,000 build, I'd recommend that Ryzen 5 7600. But I think today with the cost savings, you get an included cooler that we're probably not going to use, but it's nice to have. You still get 6 cores, 12 threads, and of course we can use DDR5 or DDR4 memory, whatever we prefer. So put that in the cart, and as I say, if we have more money later, we can always upgrade it for something else. RAM is a really easy one to tick off as well. I know that we want 32 gigs of DDR5. It's just a case of seeing how much the various kits are and where we can save money. Let's see where we land. Corsair are consistently very, very good value. I'd like a bit of RGB. I'd like some nice aesthetic touches. And of course, we don't want a cache latency that is too high. So let's see where we get with some Corsair DDR5. Always reliable, always good value. $109, $104. Let's go for the black kit. I think a white theme is going to cost more across the course of the build, and it hasn't got too bad latencies either. I'm also going to add in storage at this stage. The RAM and the SSD are easy to tick off because we know exactly what we should be able to achieve. I want a 1TB NVMe, and I want a PCI Gen 4 one at that. That's going to give you really fast read and writes. A terabyte is enough to get you started, and then if you want to expand it and add more games later, you can definitely do so. Looking through the list, and the first thing that strikes me is this $79 Samsung 990 Pro, one of the best Gen 4 NVMe's you can buy, but I think we can probably go a little bit cheaper. The SN850 is a great option on a real tight budget, but there are speed compromises that you make. One drive I've been using quite a lot recently is the Lexar NM790, so let's see how that fares. $89, so more expensive than the Samsung drive. SSD prices mega turbulent. Let's try the GAMMIX S70 Blade. I used this in a recent build, found a really good deal on it. Straight away, $64. It works with a PS5 if you want to put it in your PS5. 1TB 65, 2TB 130. With the SSD in, we can take a look at how much money we've spent so far on the 4 items in the cart, which includes a free Intel screwdriver, apparently. We're at $319. So as far as the 850 goes, we're doing pretty well. With these parts in, I think I want to look at the case next up. Now, there's a few go-to options for me when it comes to budget PC cases. Montage are a great option. Their Air 903 Max is amazing, but very, very large. I would also consider something on the cheaper end from Antec, such as this DF600 Flux I looked at a couple of years ago, but again, still a little bit more pricey than where we want to be. Let's see what Deepcool have got as far as PC cases go. Another great option for those of you shopping on a budget. $49 for their Matrix 40. Decent, but the airflow's not fantastic. $59 for the CH370. Now this could be a bit more what we're looking for. Micro ATX has got this cool sort of mesh-ish pattern on the front, and looking at the range of Deepcool cases on offer, it's one of the cheapest that they do. So I think I'm going to add that to the cart. $59 for a case nowadays is very, very cheap indeed. Talking to Deepcool, one of my favorite budget coolers coolers is the AK400. Now, contrary to popular belief, people think that the best budget cooler is the Cooler Master Hyper 212. And while it's a good option, let me show you how expensive that cooler has got. $44 for the one without any RGB, the fan's a bit ugly. If you want the RGB one, $79. I mean, that has to be a mistake. Either way, you can see the 212 is certainly not potentially the value option that it used to be. The AK400 from Deepcool, though, is a lot better. $34, you can get it in black or you can get it in white. I love the brush, the fact they actually paint the heatsink white, it's really nice. But I'm gonna go for the black one, $35, you cannot go too far wrong. Motherboard is gonna be next, and we need something either B660 or B760. This is the slightly cheaper chipset that's gonna allow for us to still support, of course, 12th and 13th and 14th gen CPUs, while also forgoing things like CPU overclocking, which we don't need on this kind of budget anyway. I do want something that's DDR5, as I think that memory makes way more sense than DDR4 in the current climate. It's got so cheap nowadays, there's no need for cheaper DDR4 anymore. Straight away, this GIGABYTE one stands out to me. ASRock have got some nice options, but that white and black isn't really going to fit with the colour scheme. So I think I'm going to pick up this GIGABYTE board instead. You still get Wi-Fi as well, which is really important. It means those of you building a PC without wired networking, especially first-time builders, really, really useful to have. It is on back order, but we'll add it to the cart as it's certainly the best option on the market. Now that takes us to 554, so we've got around about $300 or so left to go. As far as the PSU goes, we're going to allocate about $70 to the power supply, giving us roughly $230, $240 give or take. Now this is where things are going to get a bit controversial, and this is where we need to talk through the options. The 4060's technically out of budget, but not by much. We could probably stretch to the 4060. I'm not saying it's a good card, but it is feasibly an option. Otherwise, we've got the 7600 from AMD, which is also a bit VRAM constrained. Ideally, you want more than 8 gigs of VRAM, especially for 1440p gaming. Cheaper then, still, we've got Intel Arc, but I think as far as the mainstream goes, it's not quite there yet. Or we've got something like the 6700 XT, which is last gen, but has the additional VRAM. So let's take a look at 6700 XT first of all and see where we land price-wise. And this is, if I'm being honest with you, where the problems start to come in. $300, that's just going to tip us way over budget, and we frankly haven't got that money to spend in this build. If you've got the extra cash, it's a great upgrade. And you can see my recent video in the cards where I actually included the 6700 XT or the refresh 6750. The 4060 is a bit crap, as we said, and AMD's RX 7600 is a better GPU. Now, looking at the options straight away, already the cheapest card I can see, top of the list, is GIGABYTE's Radeon RX 7600. And not to be biased, but it is a card that we've reviewed before. Take a look at some of the performance metrics. When you look at our performance testing, it becomes really clear as to why the 7600 is a good choice. Take Fortnite, for example, at 1080p competitive. Bit of a classic, but it beats out the 6650, 3060 Ti and 3070, all feasible last-gen alternatives. It also comes close to AMD's own 6800 XT, a higher-end card from the last generation, and while it falls short to GPUs like the 6750 XT, it doesn't do so by a great margin, and of course it's cheaper. Move through into something like Hogwarts Legacy at 1080p high, more of a AAA title, and the 7600 even beats out the 4060 Ti, let alone the 6650, 6750 XT, only falling short really to the RTX 4070. Apex Legends is another prime example. 189 FPS is achievable at 1080p on this card. That's higher than our results of the 6650 XT, 3060 Ti, and 3060. Move up to 1440p, and to be transparent, the VRAM amount of the 7600 does struggle, especially compared to higher VRAM alternatives. But if you're looking to game at 1080p and 1080p alone, this really isn't a bad card. You can read our full review over at GeekaWhat.com at the links in the description below. So to conclude then, the 7600 is a really great card for 1080p gaming. 1440p you are going to struggle, but at $259, I'm not exactly sure this is always the bad buy people make it out to be. You can of course upgrade it to the 6700 or 6750 XT if you've got the cash, but I think for this build, the RX 7600 from GIGABYTE is actually going to be the best option. Now that takes us to slightly over budget when we account for the extra $70 for the power supply. As far as places you can make cost savings to bring this back in budget, you can get rid of the Deepcool AK400. That's going to be straight away the first recommendation, as the stock cooler, while sufficient, not fantastic, will work. You could probably trim $10 or $15 off the SSD and equally the memory, notch down to the non-RGB variant. My CPU choice, I'm very confident in. I think the 12400F is the best that we could do at this price point. So account for another $60, let's call it, for our Deepcool 700 watt budget power supply, and that's going to put us marginally over budget by $20, $25. But let's build this thing and actually see whether the extra $20 or so was worth it. A couple of days have passed and all the parts that I didn't already have are now here, including our shiny new budget GIGABYTE motherboard, affordable M80X case from Deepcool, budget PSU, amongst others. And we're going to start off with the motherboard, installing as many components into the DS3H-AX as we possibly can. Now, it's also the first time that I've had a proper hands-on look with this board from GIGABYTE. So you can see here, got room for the M.2 drive, a single GPU, PCIe slot, also got a toolless M.2 mechanism down the bottom, which is pretty cool for a budget board. And then on the rear, we've got a fairly basic I.O. with gigabit Ethernet, USB-C, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A, and of course the Wi-Fi connectivity built in. That's really important, as it means you can get connected nice and easily without the need for an external Wi-Fi adapter that you've got to find a spare PCIe lane for. CPU's going to go in next up, the i5-12400F. This 6-core 12-thread chip is going to do the business. Definitely a more no-frills solution than some of the other options on the market, but at only $150, as you saw, you really can't go too far wrong at this price point. If you guys would like to see a detailed how to build a gaming PC tutorial, maybe a beginner's version, let me know in the comments down below. The RAM is the next part, our 32GB kit from Corsair of their Vengeance RGB Pro. So let's pop this in. This grey kit or black kit is going to look really, really quite nice. And in this build, I'll be using the 2nd and 4th slots. You've still got 2 spare slots. If you wanted to upgrade to 64 gigs later, you've definitely got that option. And to be able to find a DDR5 motherboard and some DDR5 memory for such an affordable price is a testament to how far this technology really has come on. Also going to pop in the M.2 SSD at this stage, a Gen 4 drive for, what was it, like $70 or $80 or something ridiculous, means that of course we can go for a decent flash drive with plenty of storage. A terabyte is going to be great to get you started for at least a good few of your favorite games. Yes, it's not going to give you room for your 350 game large Steam library, but it's at least going to get you some of the way. And you can add extra storage or take your existing storage from your current build and add it as extra if you wish. I am also going to just pop in the CPU cooler at this stage as well before moving the motherboard into the case. I did have the AK400 Zero Dark Plus to hand, but I'm going to install it as though it's the normal non-plus version. All this means is you get an extra fan. So if you want to have a bit more airflow and you want a bit better cooling, and I suppose aesthetically something that looks a bit more chunky, then go for the plus version. I'll link everything at Amazon and Newegg for latest pricing and availability at the links in the description below. Here we go. And there we have it. So that's what the normal non-plus version looks like. The plus just has an extra fan on this side. Now included, you get a rather large bag of mounting hardware. So bear with me while I figure out what needs to go where, and I'll be right back with you. All you've got to do to get it on is put the back plate through the rear of the motherboard, like so, add some posts and some screws, and then fasten into place this black metal bracket. This is what we're using to mount the CPU cooler to. A little bit of thermal paste is next up. That's going to provide the sort of thermal bond, if you will, between the CPU and the cooler itself. So a sort of large grain of rice sized, made a bit of a mess of that, a large grain of rice sized blob. Thermal paste is the messiest part of the PC building process before removing the extra fan from the cooler, and then adding the cooler straight onto that mounting hardware I discussed just a second ago. You can start tightening these up with your fingers, but you'll want to use a screwdriver just to finish them off. So that's that one nice and tight, and then the other side. The fan will go back on, but not yet. I'm going to move the whole thing into the case first and add the fan on later so that screwing the motherboard in isn't too tricky. Otherwise though, it's looking like pretty smart really. The RAM and the cooler, it all matches the motherboard. It's looking lovely. I'm super happy with how this is turning out so far. The case is actually one of the parts I've been the most excited for with this build, and that's because I've never built in Deepcool's sort of Micro ATX CH range before. And this CH370 was really affordable, design-wise looked quite nice, and had really good reviews. So let's see exactly what we're working with. Oh, that's a big boy. First impressions are that it's actually pretty cool. The front panel is all sort of slightly obstructed mesh, but a mesh nonetheless. I/O, you've got 2 USB 3s, no USB-C, but kind of expected. Tempered glass side panel that is magnetic and toolless. Hello. There's a built-in GPU support bracket too. The rear panel has got thumb screws, but they're captive thumb screws. I mean, some brands need to look at what Deepcool are doing here, and for $60, it really is quite remarkable. The only criticism I'd have, and considering I went $20 over budget, I'm slightly slightly embarrassed I didn't realise this already. Doesn't have any front fans. It only has one fan at the rear. Now, it would probably be okay, but it's going to push temperatures higher than what I would like. So I'm going to add in a couple of cheap fans into the front. Couple of ways you can do this. Either go for some entry-level RGB fans like I'm going to do from Deepcool, coincidentally, or just go onto eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and just find some black plain PC case fans if all you're bothered about is getting the airflow in there. Lay the case down flat for the next step, and remember to add in the included rear I/O shield with the motherboard. It does feel slightly bonkers in 2023, nearly 2024, to say, put a rear I/O shield in. I think that might be the first time this year I've actually had to do that, but it's because the motherboard is so cheap and so affordable. Then slide the whole motherboard into place, and with all the standoffs already in the right place, just a simple case of adding 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 2 down the bottom to screw the board in and secure everything down. Add the CPU cooler fan back on as well at this stage, as we don't need access to anything else at this point. That is looking really good, and I think the next step is to be installing the graphics card. Now, the RX 7600, as we discussed earlier at length, is a slightly controversial GPU, but I do quite like it. And while I wish AMD had given it a couple more gigs of VRAM, 12 would have been perfect, it is still significantly cheaper than the 6750, 6700, and Nvidia's much worse RTX 4060. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that our GPU support bracket isn't in the way, but we will use this, as it is a nice thing to have, and just hover the graphics card over the top PCIe slot. I need to remove this and this PCIe slot cover. So there's a thumb screw, which we can loosen, not by hand, it's a little bit too tight. Pull that to one side, and then take out the top 2 PCIe lane covers. That, of course, is where the output for the graphics card's going to go, and it's what basically secures the whole of the GPU into place. Just going to push the clip back on the GPU PCIe slot, line the card up, there we go, bit of pressure, there we are, and that is in. A couple of screws to secure it into place, and then all that's left to do is wire it up with some power cables in just a second. Again, as I discussed earlier, PSU is actually one of the most difficult budget components to buy right now. There's just, frankly, not very many of them. Now, this Deepcool one was pretty cheap for me, but your mileage might vary, and things are changing almost on a weekly basis at the moment with power supply pricing. Take the power supply and all your cables, nicely tuck them all out the way, and just slide the PSU into the case. The PSU is then going to screw in through 4 holes at the rear, and I'm going to connect up the motherboard, CPU, and GPU power cables. The rest can be bundled away with a cable tie and shoved behind the back of the case for safekeeping. And once that's all done, the build is complete. All that's left to do is power this thing up, see how good it looks in a GeekaWhat montage to round things off. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.